Just ahead on Washington to Washington.
We talk about this as a crisis. So what I would actually encourage is that we look at this and treat it as an emergency.
The high cost of housing.
I was on a list for about a year.
Living in and out of your car with the kids.
With my kids, yes.
And the impact on the state and country.
A housing shortage as severe as we have doesn't just mean your 29-year-old is going to continue to live in your basement. It means a whole bunch of negative things in society.
The irony is that we fund these phenomenal projects in Washington State with the Housing Trust Fund, and for them to comply, they have to meet all of these regulatory hurdles that you wouldn't necessarily have to in the private market.
With Democrats in charge in this Washington,
we need to make some changes. They might be hard, but this crisis isn't getting any better by doing the things that we have done forever.
Rent control is not the answer, stabilization, whatever you want to call it. It has failed throughout the country.
And Republicans in the other.
We will no longer allow illegal aliens to live in HUD-funded housing.
It's going to take every tool in the toolbox to solve the housing crisis. And nothing that the Trump administration is doing right now is going to help us.
The debate over how to solve the housing crisis in both places is heating up. From the capital of Washington State to the capital of the United States, this is Washington to Washington. Hello and welcome to Washington. I'm Jennifer Huntley in Washington State. Most Americans have been hit by the housing crisis, either by being priced out of buying their first home, to sky-high rents, to seniors on fixed incomes dealing with rising costs and property taxes. Here in Olympia, the homes and the housing development under construction behind me are listed at more than $500,000. Just down the street, a low-income apartment building for previously homeless people is fully occupied, and a half mile from here is the site of a large homeless encampment called the Jungle. These are all examples of how in Washington State, housing instability has reached a critical level. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition ranks the state 5th for most unaffordable housing in the country. The number of people experiencing homelessness in the state continues to rise. The latest numbers from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development showed a record 12.5% increase in homelessness in 2024 from the year before. According to the Department of Commerce, Washington State needs to build 1 million homes over the next 20 years to meet current housing needs as well as population growth. In our two-part series on the housing crisis, we will examine both of those issues, affordability and supply. We begin with the cost and struggle to buy or even rent a place to live. How does it feel to be home?
Feels great, surreal. I didn't know this would ever happen.
Prepping food around a kitchen island dotted with flowers and scented candles. It's a scene that would make anyone think of home. For 34-year-old dental assistant Jane, it is the first place she has ever owned, and even she can't quite believe it.
It's been 7 weeks, so I'm still getting used to the idea that this is mine forever if I want.
For the past 7 years, Jane lived in affordable housing in Magnuson Park, paying upwards of $1,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. But even as a young professional, she could never save enough for a down payment. Skyrocketing real estate prices meant she was priced out of ever buying in Seattle, until she heard about Habitat for Humanity's affordable housing program.
One night, my friend in the apartment came over and she told me about this program she applied to own a home. And I said, send me the link. And she said, okay, I will. And I said, no, send it now. Now it was about 10 o'clock, and then we stayed up till 2 a.m. applying.
A few months after applying, Jane was chosen to become a resident of Yarrow Cottages, a multi-year affordable housing project in South King County by the local chapter of Habitat for Humanity. 6 families have already moved into finished townhomes, while the rest are being built around them.
We have 26 total units that are going to be here. That's 26 families that are going to be able to call this place home.
Ryan Donahue is the Chief Advocacy Officer for this chapter of Habitat for Humanity. The organization builds homes in King and Kittitas counties.
Our overall pipeline is over 300 homes that we're working on over the next 5 years.
They are an independent affiliate of Habitat for Humanity International and have been around since 1986. A lot has changed since then, especially in areas of the country like Seattle, where a booming tech economy is driving housing prices through the roof.
We actually did a study a few years ago looking at our average home buyer. And one of the things that we found was our average home buyer was roughly 38 years old and typically a single mother. One of the things that we wanted to try and do, and we started asking ourselves, what happens if we can get them at 28 or at 25, right? What happens if we can get them into that pipeline sooner, through that continuum sooner, to be able to give them an opportunity to really step up and really move forward?
Yarrow Cottage's 2-bedroom, 1.5-bath townhouses are priced in the low $300,000 range. The entire project is expected to be finished later this year. On the day we visited Jane, a townhouse just a block away was on the market for $670,000.
The way that we do most of our projects now is a combination of public dollars, private dollars, and home mortgages that our homeowners are able to buy themselves to be able to help purchase those homes.
The Habitat homes fill fast, a reminder the need is always there and growing.
I would say most people that I tell about it and share my experience with it, they know someone in their life that would benefit from it, and they want, how do I apply? What are the next steps? So the need that I've found out through sharing my need for it is immensely high in this area.
This is an emergency, and we talk about this as a crisis. So what I would actually encourage is that we look at this and treat it as an emergency.
So how are projects like this funded, and how much more money is needed? Nearly 40 years ago, lawmakers created the Housing Trust Fund as a way to help low-income residents afford housing. The money from the fund goes to local governments, housing authorities, nonprofits like Habitat, and tribes, and can be used for construction, rent subsidies, or down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers. It's the state's primary way to fund affordable housing projects. But only recently did lawmakers begin pouring money into it in large amounts. In 2023, lawmakers designated a record $400 million for the fund.
We're really glad that the state government has stepped up, particularly over the last few years.
The Speaker has opened the roll call machine.
In 2025, the legislature dropped a record-setting $605 million into the Housing Trust Fund for the construction of affordable housing projects.
The Housing Trust Fund works. We've seen our affordable housing production go up dramatically since we started being able to access that.
Much of the state funding for affordable housing is distributed through the Department of Commerce.
Commerce is kind of the kitchen drawer for Washington State.
Newly appointed Commerce Director and former State Senator Joe Nguyen has also worked in the private sector for Expedia and Microsoft. We met him one afternoon at a Commerce-funded affordable housing project on Olympia's West Side. He had just come from a meeting with Governor Ferguson, and he quickly rattled off just some of the programs the Department of Commerce is in charge of.
Like you said, the Housing Trust Fund is there. We have these programs for housing infrastructure. It's called CHIPS. So that way we can build the sewer lines, the electricals, the sidewalks, so that you can build affordable housing. We have another program called the LAP program, Land Acquisition Program, where a lot of times you'll see nonprofit organizations or churches, they want to actually build affordable housing, but they have cash flow issues. The state can come in, help lock up that land in a lease, and get it to an affordable housing developer to build as well. So we have a number of tools for us to be able to build. And most importantly, Commerce is actually in charge of the policies as well.
When housing policies in the legislature become law, Commerce puts the law into practice.
Commerce is the one that works with the local jurisdictions and say, this is the bill that was passed. This is how you need to comply within your jurisdictions. So we are that full life cycle when it comes to housing affordability.
For Nguyen, moving forward means sometimes looking back at policies that are keeping the state from reaching its housing goals.
The irony is that we fund these phenomenal projects at Washington State with the Housing Trust Fund, and for them to comply, they have to meet all of these regulatory hurdles that you wouldn't necessarily have to in the private market. So what ends up happening is that you're spending money on things that are not necessarily building housing. So we can certainly streamline that process.
Given his private sector background, Nguyen speaks fast and with purpose. But his purpose also comes from his own experience as a child of first-generation Vietnamese immigrants growing up in public housing outside Seattle.
Oh my goodness. Are you about to be so good?
Just a floor above where we interview director Nguyen is the apartment belonging to Maya and her 4 children, including her newborn baby girl.
Do you want to wear your mask?
Yeah.
Because of domestic?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maya covered her face with a mask and isn't using her real name because she moved to Washington State after fleeing domestic abuse in Cleveland, Ohio. When she first arrived, she and her children slept in her car or crashed at the homes of friends she met.
It was very hard, especially for my kids. I can handle it by myself, but my kids have to go through that in the cold, cramped up in the car, even at different people's houses. I have to go through different people, rules, different challenges.
She found work at a warehouse and tried to find permanent housing for her family.
The rent is so expensive out here. It was like I could not believe the prices out here. It was so high, and I'm like, my job could not afford it.
The Landing is managed by the Family Support Center and is made up of 62 apartments for previously homeless families that make at or below 50% of the area media income. Applicants go through a coordinated entry process that can take time.
I was on the list for about a year.
Living in and out of your car with the kids?
With my kids, yes.
Where were you living before you lived here?
Before I lived here, just out on the streets.
Down the hall from Maya's apartment is where Glenn and his 9-year-old son live. Glenn has spent much of his adult life on the streets, but he knew he needed a place to live if he wanted custody of his son.
Wow, that's a pretty good read.
Having stable housing, he says, is the foundation for a more stable life.
My son wasn't getting the proper care that he needed, and now that I'm here, I can give him the proper care that he needs.
While all of these affordable housing stories have been life-changing for the residents, there is no question that it needs to be repeated on a much greater scale.
Washingtonians need more housing. Lots more housing.
Governor Bob Ferguson wants to build 200,000 homes over the next 4 years in an effort to reach the 1 million home goal by 2045. Of the 1 million, half of those homes must be affordable for people making less than 50% of the area median income.
We went to work last fall to produce a housing action plan.
Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck was tapped by the incoming governor to chair a committee that would focus on housing priorities for the first 100 days of Governor Ferguson's term. The subcommittee produced a report, a housing action plan, in January.
Visual aid number 1.
The report urged the legislature to invest more into the state's Housing Trust Fund, as well as funding for the CHIP program, which pays for utility connections and related infrastructure fees for low-income housing. It also recommended creating a new program to look at root causes of housing instability.
People feel this. Housing costs are usually the number one expense of families. They know what's happening out there. They know costs are going through the roof. They know their kid can't leave the basement. They know that they're spending too much of their income on housing costs. They know that if they're low-income people, they're a bad break away from losing their shelter.
Heck says housing costs have an impact on virtually every part of the economy.
It's important to understand that a housing shortage as severe as we have doesn't just mean your 29-year-old is going to continue to live in your basement. It means a whole bunch of negative things in society. It means that there will be slower economic growth. And we know this to be the fact because economic development professionals, when we surveyed them statewide, said this is the number one impediment to quality economic growth.
But Heck says even with an increase in legislative funding, the housing crisis won't be solved by the legislature alone.
It's a tiny portion of the solution. That's why local, state, federal government, and the private sector all have to do this in order for us to make material progress.
So how did we get here? Like most issues, there is no simple answer. Between higher wage jobs driving up housing costs and the Great Recession of 2008, halting construction of new homes and lending for mortgages, The crisis has grown over time, but it's become a prime focus for the legislature.
Remarks, Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. President.
In recent years.
How we got here, in my opinion, there's a couple different things.
Newly elected Senator Jessica Bateman may be new to the Senate, but not to the legislature or to the issue of affordable housing.
When we had the Great Recession, there were a lot of people that worked in the construction trades, people that build homes and all of the different tradespeople that go into that process that left because there were not enough homes to construct and because of that downturn in the economy. That's obvious. We also have this kind of slow creep of an avalanche of not building enough housing for population growth based on systemic barriers to doing so.
Bateman served as a state representative since 2021, and before that on the Olympia City Council. She's been passionate about housing throughout her career.
When I was on city council, this issue of homelessness and the increasing number of people in our community that were being unhoused came up, and I thought, why do we have this problem in the first place? And then I looked around and said, well, we don't have enough housing, and yet we make it impossible and illegal to build diverse housing options.
When Bateman moved to the legislative stage, she positioned herself as a champion of equitable housing. In 2023, she built a coalition to pass one of the most significant bills on housing statewide, the Middle Housing Bill.
But I believe that we can all agree that our common purpose here is to find effective solutions for our housing crisis.
The measure required cities to revise their regulations in areas that typically were dedicated to single-family housing so that townhomes, ADUs, and other forms of multi-housing could be built.
That was one of the great bills that year. It also got bipartisan support.
Most people don't know that without the Republicans, without the Republican caucus, that policy would have never passed.
Representative Andrew Barkis was a co-sponsor of the Middle Housing Bill with Senator Bateman.
Madam Speaker, this is a good policy.
As a longtime property manager, Barkis sees the housing crisis as one that has been building for years.
I would say it goes back as far as 30 years. Regulatory, the Growth Management Act, so forth and so on. So it's gotten us here to this point. Dismantling that and getting at it is the challenge that we face in the legislature today.
Barkis believes the problem was ignored for too long, while other issues, such as climate change, took priority.
So think in the last couple of years, what have we done? A lot of climate policy, clean building standards, removal of natural gas. These are things that drive costs up.
Many saw the Middle Housing Bill as an example of bipartisan work in a Democrat-controlled legislature. But just 2 years later, during the 2025 legislative session, one piece of housing legislation divided parties.
We have an obligation to take care of working class people at this time in our history, especially when they feel like the federal government is coming for them.
As so many good people have said on this floor tonight, this is not going to help the people that it is intended to help. It's going to hurt them.
A rent stabilization bill aimed at capping the amount landlords could increase in rent each year. Bateman was one of the sponsors in the Senate, and it was one of her top housing priorities to get passed.
So we want to make sure that the people that are on the verge, that we can stabilize them, keep them in their home, and help them so that they don't become homeless, because the cost for them and for the state goes up dramatically when that happens.
Republicans say capping rents would drive developers out of Washington state.
First of all, rent control is not the answer, or stabilization, whatever you want to call it. It has failed throughout the country. Ultimately, it will impact supply because the developers will not build.
During debate, the Senate changed the House version by increasing the rental cap to 10%. The measure ended up in a conference committee to hash out differences. The compromise, the cap on rent stayed at 7% plus inflation, or 10%, whichever was less. But on the last day of the session on TVW's The Impact, questions remained about the effect the bill could have on the construction industry.
The battle on rent stabilization was epic, and we fought to the very end. And I'm afraid that will have extreme consequences in Washington state when it comes to development, when it comes to building.
I'm optimistic that it's going to keep some people from being price gouged by that minority of landlords who would be inclined to engage in that practice. On the other hand, I'm concerned about what it might do to the flow of capital into the construction of additional housing.
Bateman says the measure is just one piece of the pie in solving the problem.
There's no single silver bullet solution to our housing shortage and crisis. We cannot just do one thing and not the others. In this bill, the rent stabilization bill, which limits how much a landlord can increase the rent, goes hand in hand with all of our efforts to increase the supply, because the underlying cause is not having enough housing.
Representative Barkas wants more focus on speeding up home construction to bring down housing costs.
Everything we do in government seems to be incremental. So we take little chunks, little bites, and we had a very strong session in 2023, some call it the Year of Housing, where we had a multitude of bipartisan policies that we did. We haven't been able to continue that momentum for a myriad of reasons.
While time is ticking, the work takes time. It can be upwards of 3 years before any housing-related bills passed in the current session go from breaking ground to move-in day for a homeowner. Both lawmakers agree the issue is complex, and yet they know the simple truth. More people in Washington state and across the country need the opportunity for a chance at the American dream.
It's been probably the biggest accomplishment I've had in my life.
While conducting our legislative interviews, the news out of the other Washington was centered on the proposed cuts by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. We asked both Senator Bateman and Representative Barkas their thoughts on how it might impact federal funding on housing for states.
We're very concerned about the staffing at the Housing and Urban Development. Funding for vouchers in Washington state, which comes through our investment from HUD, has been declining for decades. And in my community, vouchers help the most vulnerable and the lowest income of my community members. And every time the list for vouchers opens, we have thousands of people that cannot make it onto that list, who have to wait for years for the next time for it to open. So it's clearly not reaching enough of the very people that it is intended to serve.
I think that there is a course fear when it comes to change. I don't believe that federal support's going to go away for Washington state. I do believe that there's going to be a more critical eye placed upon it. I do believe that there's going to be a more accountability placed upon it, which there should be.
Given that Washington state is controlled by Democrats in the legislature and the governorship, and the other Washington has Republicans in charge of both Congress and the presidency, what impact will the political divisions have on housing policy? And how are those federal policies changing under the Trump administration? It may be a while before we have any clear answers. The regional office for the Department of Housing and Urban Development is located inside the historic Federal Building near downtown Seattle's Pioneer Square. The building takes up an entire city block and includes offices for a number of federal agencies, including the National Park Service and the Veterans Administration. But whether HUD continues to operate out of here remains to be seen. That's because under the Trump administration, the department is looking at shutting down field offices in 34 states, and Washington could be one of them. The field offices oversee a number of HUD's programs, including vouchers for low-income housing and processing applications for mortgage insurance, along with ensuring fair housing laws.
We all know we're in a housing crisis. It's bipartisanly recognized in Olympia and across the country.
Newly elected Democratic Congresswoman Emily Randall.
I'm scared for my constituents. I'm scared for my neighbors.
Partly blames partisan politics for the Trump administration targeting Washington state in the closures.
We are punishing municipalities because they don't go along with the Trump administration with Musk's orders. If they're looking for ways to harm their enemies, then they're not serving a community that needs to be housed. We're not going to solve this homelessness crisis.
A statement from the Department of Housing and Urban Development says the Seattle office administers HUD programs that provided, quote, $6.5 billion in federal funds in 2024 for the state of Washington. The statement continues by saying HUD is carrying out President Trump's broader efforts to restructure and streamline the federal government. And to date, no decisions have been finalized on HUD's future plans regarding field offices. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Scott Turner did not respond to TVW's request for an interview.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time. Yes, sir, Brett. Great to be with you.
But he did tell Fox News that HUD, in its very nature, is not partisan.
It's not political. You think about housing. Housing doesn't have a party. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. Housing impacts every American individual and family. And so when people think about HUD, think about service and mission and meeting people where they are.
The current field director for Seattle's HUD office declined an interview, saying he needs to wait until priorities are outlined from the president and Secretary Turner. The potential closures are all a part of the cost-cutting measures that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is asking of federal agencies. At the 100-day mark of Trump's presidency, Secretary Turner highlighted just some of the ways HUD was doing this, announcing 2,300 of HUD's 10,000 employees have taken resignation offers, and the creation of its own DOGE-inspired efficiency task force to look into additional ways to cut spending at the agency. He claims the task force has cut about $260 million in contracts so far.
We serve the most vulnerable people of our nation as it pertains to housing, as it pertains to homelessness, as it pertains to disaster recovery. And HUD is a mission-minded place.
Turner is making it clear that his mission is different from previous administrations. One of Turner's first actions was to end diversity, equity, and inclusion projects within HUD by canceling $4 million in contracts the agency said promoted DEI. Turner is also partnering with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to share data on housing applicants so that only American citizens receive federal housing funds.
We will no longer allow illegal aliens to live in HUD-funded housing. Our only priority at HUD is the American people, American citizens.
Meantime, a delegation of Northwest Democratic congressional representatives, including Washington Senator Patty Murray, sent a letter to Secretary Turner, urging him to not close the Seattle or Portland regional offices. The group wrote that, quote, if HUD moved forward with the planned closures, the nearest HUD office would be in San Francisco, hundreds of miles from Seattle and Portland, and the closures would have devastating impacts on communities that rely on vital services for housing. With no clear timeline on when any field office closures might occur, Congresswoman Randall says she is concerned about the department's priorities under the Trump administration.
I think the answer here is there's not a silver bullet, right? We can't do one thing and say that's going to fix it. It's going to take every tool in the toolbox to solve the housing crisis. And nothing that the Trump administration is doing right now is going to help us. They need to slow down, to stop, freezing grants because they say, these dangerous words like diversity or female or underserved.
Back in Washington state, it's unknown how soon residents here may feel the impacts of housing decisions made in D.C.
Certainty is what the business community, for example, always says that's what we need. We need stability and certainty. And we're obviously not getting either of those yet. Buckle up.
We were unable to schedule an interview with the other new incoming House member from Washington state, Republican Representative Michael Baumgartner. On the next episode of Washington to Washington, the projections are staggering. 1 million homes need to be built in the state by 2045. One estimate puts the number of homes needed nationwide right now at 7 million.
You're crazy if you go into the real estate market or the building market because you're getting hit by everything. It's almost like running it in a track meet when you're doing hurdles. Okay, I crossed one hurdle, here's another one, and all of those hurdles add cost.
How will Washington state and the country achieve those numbers, and what obstacles are holding us back?
We have to get the land use process sped up, which means permitting times, permitting fees, land development processes, all of those keep us from building housing faster.
As we continue our look at housing, we turn our focus to the supply issue and proposals brought up by state lawmakers to bring back more kit home building and encourage more condo development.
Washington state is an outlier in terms of its liability laws around condo construction, and that's led to a lot of home builders getting out of the market to build the condos because it's so expensive. There's a lot of risk.
We need to hurry up and get a little bit more people in shelter, permanent shelters. And kit home seems to be an obvious natural fit to that.
That's next time on Washington to Washington. For now, from Washington State, thank you for watching.